Hey guys, the Polish Elf here bringing you a new video, and today I am here to talk about world building with everyone. Recently, I have been very inspired. I've been writing on and off now for a few years, but recently I have been very into writing a world for my Dungeons & Dragons campaign that I'm running with a few friends of mine. And I pretty much wrote this like 3 or 4 days straight. Not the script for this video. The script for this video is about 2 sentences that I'm just kind of free forming off of. But I wrote the world in about 3 to 4 days straight. And this was a project that meant a lot to me due to just how invested, how inspired my mind was at the time of writing this. And it made me feel like a real writer. I don't know, I've never felt very inspired before, but due to this kind of epiphany almost I had, I realized I have a lot to say about world building and a lot of information I want to pass on to people who are confused or want to get better at world building. So, we're here today to talk about the fundamentals of world building and how you can do it easy peasy. So, first, we need to talk about there's a few fundamentals in world building, I should say. But first, the first 3 are kind of interchangeable of when you need to do them in your, concept of world building, like making your world, and that's the scope of your world. So are you making a grand adventure, grand world, or are you making a little, city that can be a grand city, but how big is your world basically going to be? That's what scope is. And then your tone. Basically, are you going for an Adventure Time or a Dark Souls type of thing? So are you going for a more goofy world with a lot of, fun things to do in it and almost unconsequential actions? Or are you going for a more gritty, serious world with a lot of, hatred and despair and things like that? And then finally, what audience are you trying to go for? I'm not talking about just, my genre is sci-fi or etc. No, I'm talking about what demographic are you really reaching out to in your world? Are you reaching out to people you know? Like, are you United making a D&D campaign? Are you making a video game? Are you making a novel, things like that? What demographic are you reaching to while writing? You really have to think about these 3 things. I'll give examples. So, just basing it off my world, my scope is a very grand continent with multiple political factions and nations is rising, and it's reformed and changed so much over the past 100 years. We'll talk about details later, but the scope of the world is big. There's a lot of rich things to do in the world, because I wrote this with the players in mind, that they can do whatever they want in this world. That is why the scope is larger, so they have a lot to do. The tone of my world is, I wouldn't really say it's serious, like overly serious at least, because we're just there to have a fun time, There's a lot of jokes. There's a lot of jokes we have together. There's a lot of funny things in the world, but at the same time, it never loses the immersion. At least that's what I've tried to write. My friend said I did a good job about writing, so it's never losing the immersion for the sake of a joke, basically. It's always a story that is there, and a world that is there, more so, that feels, alive and real. And it feels like not too fantastical, where it's just out of touch with everything, like Midsummer Night Dream, for instance. Or it's not like a world that's too gritty and just boring, kind of, where it just feels like, okay, this is alright, kind of like Warhammer in my opinion. That might be a debated topic right there, but that's just my opinion. I don't think Warhammer's actually boring though. It's interesting. It's just kind of not for me. But anyways, and then finally, my audience, of course, is the people I wrote the world for, my players, my friends, and I knew in mind that they all were, they could get down with a world, but they didn't want something that's they didn't want a hardcore Warhammer world, and they didn't want a goofy fun time world. So I had to find a good in-between for them. And that's what I wrote. So, I would say in the world building process, trying to figure out what steps you take to world building, I would say first, if you have an idea for your story in mind, like what story you want to tell, first establish your audience. First think, okay, how do I want to portray this, and to who I want to portray to, not betray. I would say actually combine tone and audience if you're on that mindset. If you just have the world in mind, like you just have like, oh, that'd be cool, like things going on in this fictional world you're making, then try to think of the scope and tone. I would say the tone just goes so in deep with the world that you could do that first nearly every time. Just decide what kind of tone you're going for, and then it just depends how deep and different your mindset is to what works for you. So basically just think different ideas and things in your world of what works for you, and decide what step you want to do first, your scope, tone, or audience. All of them are fine, to be honest, because they all relate to each other and they all go into each other. I guess scope is a little different from the other two, but you know what I mean. They all relate very hard to each other. And then when you have these things, these free things, when you have them kind of cemented down in your mind that, okay, this is good, I feel comfortable with this, and I'm down to write a world around this, then go into your actual details of the world. So your history, your geography, your current affairs, things like that. So first, when you're doing this, you need to take into account your audience and your story. So if you have a story about, let's say, a humble farmer going on a grand adventure to save his wife or something like that, the farmer isn't going to know a lot from the beginning. So if you're doing a perspective story, oh yeah, this is the other thing. You need to understand what perspective you're doing in the story. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. So what I did in mine D&D campaign, because it's a little different. It's definitely a little different. I created a lore of common knowledge of like what every person should know in the world, and I told my players, if you want to know more, then just tell me, and if you can tell me why you should know more about the world or one specific thing, well, then tell me why. Tell me your backstory, and we can make something up. Because that's kind of a thing specific to D&D, so that's why it's a little weird for me. But if you're making a story, video game writing, things like that, or I should say, if you're making a novel or you're writing for a game, if you're writing a story for either of those, definitely keep in mind your characters and your narration. So if you're narrating omnipotently, third person, you're a god narrating the viewer, and then you're just kind of looking for the lens of a god at the characters you're writing about, then you can describe the world however in detail you want, to the point where it still is relevant to your story. So say if your character is the humble farmer, then you can write about political things going on in the world. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. Of political actions going on in the round of the world and where he lives. But don't talk about this one trading embassy randomly in the north, like 2 million miles in the north, that has no relation to the farmer or the story you're going to tell. That's more so common sense, but I'm just emphasizing it. Do not tell anything over detailed. So don't try to come up with something. Like, you can come up with a lot of details, but know what details to leave out when you're telling your players or telling your audience, telling your reader what is happening, and trying to detail the world so it's interesting but not very overbearing. I know it's hard to not be too overbearing or too vague, but there's a happy medium. You just got to keep working to find it. That's what I say. So, with that in mind, remember, keep in perspective of your characters and your actual narration perspective. I'm narrating in the point of D&D is much different than what you would write for a different story, so I'll talk about both. I'll recap both once again really quickly, just for anyone who wants to make either. So, if you're doing a D&D campaign, you need to understand that, hey, I am the narrator. I am probably an omnipotent kind of narrator. But you need to also understand that your players are actual living characters in your world that aren't to be narrated to. The readers and viewers of your story in a D&D campaign aren't people who want the story per se. They're the people that are living the story. So they need to know the essentials, not the details. They need to know things around them. They need to know all of the details of things that are important to them. I kept my campaign very open-ended so that players can travel wherever they want in the world. But I didn't tell them every little thing going on in the world because that's unnecessary. That's totally unnecessary. I told them one sentence basically of everything happening in the world on a grand scheme. This faction has this problem, this faction has this problem. In one sentence, I told them all that. Well, at least one sentence for each problem. So, since I have about 6 factions, essentially, that's what I wrote. 6 sentences. 1 paragraph, essentially, for my viewers. And that is it. Now, if you're writing with, the intention of having the viewer/player of a game or a novel in mind, then add more details. So they have a more kind of refined look at your world. So they have the lens that you are trying to craft for them in the world. Trying to basically create their perspective and lens. So if you're trying to make one thing look good and one thing look bad, well, you got to craft your lens like that. If you're trying to make everything very neutral, then you got to craft your lens like that. You just have to craft the reader's lens using good writing and actually interesting, writing to make the reader enjoy your world and understand your world, more importantly. That's kind of why you need to kind of understand that while making the history and geography. The final point I have is definitely a little, more just kind of not obvious per se, but more so just kind of like you gotta think, how does this world function? When you're making concepts of a world and you're making fantastical things, you need to realize you can't just have the cop-out answer of, oh, it's fueled by magic. Everything just doesn't make any fucking sense and is fantastical because magic. No, you can't do that because that's uninteresting. I mean, you can do that if the tone is less serious and less in depth of the world, but if you're going for a very big epic world, you can't just have cop-out answers like that. You need to have answers like, well, say this political border was established because of a resource in this nation, so they kept it to themselves, or this is smaller than this due to this mountain area, things like that. You need to understand the geography and history of your world to craft the details of your world, so then you can portray it to the audience. So, I hope that all made sense. I'm sorry if something went a little more on a diatribe than something else. I definitely rant a lot. So please just, if you have any questions, ask in the comments below. If you did enjoy, please like and subscribe. It would mean the world. Especially comments also just telling me hey, this helped me, or good job. That'd mean a ton if it actually did. If it didn't, well, please just ask me questions, or tell me something I missed. If you think I missed a pivotal fundamental about world building, tell me. I'd be glad to discuss. It's always fun. So yeah, thank you, love you, bye. Hey, really quick here. I realized there's a few microphone issues that happen. I think it was just me being dumb and getting too close to the microphone. So sorry about that. And also, I will be actually kind of posting the world I made in our D&D session after this video. Next week, I should have a video where we'll do our second session. I recorded the first one, but sadly, I didn't fucking record the audio. I'm so stupid. So that was unfortunate. But yeah. Thanks for watching once again. I have a Twitch channel just on Twitch, The Pole Shelf, if you want to follow it. Leave a like and subscribe if you liked it. Love you, bye.